According to Captain Picard, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It's a philosophy, and a very correct one. But sometimes it's just nonsense. I mean, how do people decide when to apply it and when to ignore it? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's live stream. Let's start the show. Welcome to the Savage Stream, the weekly live stream where we talk all things Star Trek. I'm your host, Teresa Sci-Fi Savage, and today we're going to be talking about Prime Directive, Shmime Directive, as I love to say. So when it comes to the Prime Directive, which is just kind of an overall non-interference policy that Starfleet has, I've noticed that there are about 3 different use cases for the Prime Directive. The first, and the one that I think it was mostly intended for, is when it comes to pre-warp societies. Anybody who has not reached the same level of technological advancement as Starfleet and all of the allies. And the rule is do not engage. Do not engage. Don't talk to them. Don't contact them. Don't show up on their planet. Don't get captured. All of that sort of thing. Because introducing this knowledge or any of the technology early could have a massive impact on how this culture develops. And the assumption is that the impact would be extremely negative, right? And it's going to mess up with their natural evolution. So I think that's the main use case that the Prime Directive was kind of designed for. But there are 2 other use cases that we see quite often. And the second one is to obey local laws as long as convenient, right? Whenever it comes to like death penalty stuff, usually that goes out the window. But the big idea is obey local laws. If you're on somebody else's planet, follow their rules, right? And then the third use case is don't get involved in local politics or local conflicts. And again, I think that kind of goes back to let's not interfere with the natural evolution of things. Let's not interfere with what other societies are doing. So today we're going to talk about 7 different episodes that really dig into these 3 different use cases. So let's start with episode number 7. Season 1, Episode 8, Justice. While visiting the P90X version of Risa, Wesley Crusher accidentally breaks the law and faces the death penalty. That's because the orbiting entity punishes every crime on this planet with instant death. Picard persuades the entity to let Wesley slide, and it grudgingly allows the away team to leave with the threat to never return. So the thing about this episode is I hate it. This is one of my least favorite episodes in the entire pantheon of Star Trek, in the Star Trek universe, in the Star Trek multiverse. This is one of my least favorite episodes. And if there was a way for me to remove it from canon permanently forever, I absolutely would. However, for this discussion of Prime Directive, I thought this was the perfect episode to kick things off, because here's a use case where the Prime Directive does not allow them to disregard local laws. Now, in this case, Wesley, as you saw, stepped into a flower bed. That's a capital punishment level crime on this ridiculous planet. And so when the people informed him, like, yeah, we're going to give him this lethal injection right now, right outside the planter, you know, all of a sudden phasers are pulled out and they're like, wait a minute, we didn't know about this law. We didn't know about this law. Funny thing about laws, because this is true in America. I would assume it's true everywhere else. But my friend's a lawyer, and she was doing this training about like, you know, business law and stuff. And she said, ignorance of the law is not a defense. So basically not knowing that that was a law doesn't matter if you break said law. You still have to face the penalties and punishments of that law, which I was like, oh, shoot. Like when she says it makes sense. But when you're in that position where you do something wrong and you didn't know it was wrong, and then all of a sudden you get in trouble, you're like, but I didn't even know, right? And according to the law, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you know it or don't know it. The law is the law. So in this case, the law is the law. They found out that everything is punishable by death, like just a little bit too late, like 5 minutes after the fact. But after talking to the people, Picard was like, yeah, nah, kill that. I'm done with that. Like, we're just going to take Wesley and go. I mean, at first he tried to diplomat his way through it. And they were like, no, these are our laws. And you think you're better than us? You're not going to follow our laws? And Picard was like, no, it's not that we're better than you. It's just that we're not going to follow that law. So he's like, I'm sorry we couldn't come to an agreement. But since our technology is like better, we're going to take Wesley and bounce. At the same time, though, there was that entity orbiting in space, some kind of alien species ? We don't know anything about this entity except for it has a loud voice. And so that entity like disables all the transporters because it's like, no, you're going to stay on my planet and follow my rules, which is ironic because it actually wants them to leave the planet at the same exact time. Somehow Picard talks sense into the entity and it lets them leave and get away with it and whatever. And who cares because the episode's stupid anyways. But that idea of we will follow local laws unless, I feel like that's super important. Like before I go to a planet, if that's the case, let me know what things will get me killed. Let me know those laws. Maybe anything else, jaywalking is a ticket or something like that. Like maybe I don't need to know all the things and we can kind of work it out through diplomatic channels if needed. But if stepping on a flower is going to sentence me to death, that's something I feel like should be in the brief before we all head to the planet. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know whose job that would be. I want to put it on security because security is already, but it's somebody's job to do this work before people step foot on the planet. Another thing about this episode that I thought was really weird when I was pulling those clips, which by the way is probably the third time in life I've ever seen that episode, is when I was pulling these clips, and probably the last time I will ever look at that episode unless I have to talk about it again. But when I was pulling the clips, I thought to myself, this society does not seem post-warp, does it? Like when they take one of the Ito off of the planet onto the Enterprise for some reason to talk to her or something. And the entity in space gets all mad and he's like, you better send her back or I'm going to destroy the Enterprise. Basically, every 2 seconds, it's like, I'm going to destroy the Enterprise. And they're like, okay, send her back, send her back. But then I'm like, okay, well, if he doesn't want them off I think the entity's voice was male, but if the entity doesn't want the Ito people off the planet, then that tells me they don't have warp capable ships or ships allowing them to leave the planet in the first place. And they don't seem super advanced. Like, we don't really see any technology from them either on the planet. So they feel pre-warpy to me, which is like, maybe we shouldn't have even been here. Anyways, I want to say hello to everybody who's here live and hello to everybody who's joining on the replay. Don't forget to hit that like button and hit subscribe if you're enjoying this conversation so far. Yeah, I got a lot of issues with this episode, but the big idea is Prime Directive. And here's my question for you. Do you think they should have obeyed the Prime Directive in this situation? And that's going to be my question for all the episodes today. Should they have obeyed the Prime Directive in this situation? And if so, how should they have? And if not, what should they have done instead? Now, in this case, they did not. And following it, obeying it would mean putting poor Wesley Crusher to death and really putting their ship in danger, because at this stage of season 1, Wesley Crusher is the only person holding this ship together from week to week. He's the only one fighting off all the bad guys, figuring out all the drunk viruses and saving the day left and right. So not having Wesley would be a detriment to all of Starfleet, seeing as this is the flagship of the Federation. However, putting that aside, do you think they should have followed the Prime Directive here? That's my question to you. Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. I'm going to check the comments, and then we're going to hit episode number 6 on the list. So this is great. Onog72 said, I'm not going to make it live, but I got you, boo. And they say, just want to say it would have been cool if the planet Data saved had become a hostile enemy and the little girl, as an adult, discovered Data saved her planet. So I have 2 things to say about this. The first thing is that for some reason, every time I mention Prime Directive with my fellow Trekkies, and I'm like, why didn't they just save this dying planet, right? Every time I do that, they're always like, but they could grow up to be enemies. And I'm always like kind of confused as why is that the knee jerk? Because they could also grow up to be allies. They could also grow up to be neutral. They could also grow up to never have any interactions with the Federation ever again. But also, as far as that they could grow up to be enemies thing, I also think about like the level of technology, and I get technology moves fast and stuff like that. But if they're at like Bronze Age development and you're at like warp capable development, by the time they get to warp capable development, shouldn't you get like time travel development or something like that? Like, is the idea that at some point technological advances will stop and the enemy planet's going to catch up and they're going to be like a legitimate threat? Because that seems unlikely. So that's the first thing. Because I always hear that and I'm always like, but why would they be enemies? Why enemies of all things? Why not nothing at all? Why not neutral? But then the second thing is I love this idea. So Onog72, I was like, okay, I was thinking of through the scenario. So what if Sarjenka grows up and it's kind of like a Selah situation? She grows up and she becomes like the leader of this, band of rebels or whatever, fighters, maybe they're pirates, I don't know. And somehow she comes across the Enterprise and she's got them in her grips and they were like, one more phaser shot and the Enterprise is going to be blown to bits or whatever. And then she gets them on screen because she's going to make her demands. And then she sees Data sitting there at the comms, right? And she's like, Data? And he's like, Sarjenka, you have changed, right? And she's like, stand down. He's a friend. That would be so cool. Like, I would love to see that. I feel like that's something we would only be able to see in Lower Decks. That's the only chance we would get some kind of like, where are they now with Sarjenka's people? That being said, I had no need to see what happens to Sarjenka's people. They survive. Data saves them. That's awesome. but like if we were to ever see something else from them, it probably would only happen in Lower Decks. And at the time of this recording, at the time of this conversation, Lower Decks has a few more episodes left, and I don't know if they're gonna have time to get to that. And I don't know if they've done it in past seasons, and I just totally missed it. Anyways, okay, back to the chats. Hello, Michelle and Wingrace and Nadia. Nadia says, "Ugh, this episode is so gross on so many levels." Oh, sorry. Let me put this up. She says, "Ugh, this episode is so gross on so many levels. Season 1, man. Seriously." And Michelle says, "I love this episode. It's so bad, it's good." But is it? Or is it so bad that it's just bad? Nadia says, "Yeah, Tasha Yar's security briefing was a failure. Her security briefing, as I recall, was these people are very nice. They make love at the drop of a hat, any hat." I think that was her security briefing. So maybe she should have done a little more digging. And when we recorded the podcast for the TNG podcast, my co-host Andrea was like, "What made Beverly then respond to that comment from Tasha Yar saying, 'We should bring the kids. That would be a fun place for kids.'" Yeah, Andrea had me dying on that. I was like, "Yeah, you're right. That's like, wait, what's going on here?" Um, yeah, Nadia says Yar assured Picard or Riker or somebody that everything was fine down there and it was totally safe to visit. Um, oh, let me see. Mm, I do not know how to say your name because it's all in Greek letters. So Epinurans, maybe? I don't know. Maybe write in American letters, and then I could pronounce it properly. But this person says, "I get in arguments with my dad daily. Look at the Shellyak from the Ensigns of Command, and they're jerks, but Captain Picard makes a total Captain Archer of himself." That's hilarious. Yeah, the Shellyak conversation. Mm, I was gonna say that didn't even make my list. That didn't make my list for today's episodes because this is all about Prime Directive stuff. And in the case of the Shellyak, it was a ship of human colonists who crashed on that planet, crash landed on that planet, and then they were there for like I don't know, like 100 years or something like that, and nobody knew they were there. And they were making a life for themselves when the Shellyak came back and said, "That's our planet. We're going to exterminate all the humans on it unless you get them off because we're ready to inhabit it." So that one's not like a Prime Directive issue, but yeah, that's definitely an episode we need to talk about at some point because a lot of stuff is going on in that episode. Nadia says, "Should they have obeyed? Pretty sure that every That's a good point. Pretty sure that everyone who hates Wesley would have said yes. LOL. I'm with you on the other point though. Not sure why they made first contact with this society if they have no warp." And then Michelle says, "Thank you for providing a much needed distraction from current events," which you would understand if you're watching this in real time. But if you're watching this in the future, hi future people. Today is the kind of day where we all need we just all need a moment. Today is just like a really big day. Um, yeah, when Grace says best to come from this episode is the Mexican episode of id. I don't know what that is, when Grace. Is that I don't know what that is. Is that like a TOS reference? Because oh, you might not know this. I haven't seen any TOS episodes. I've seen actually one. I saw the one with Khan and it was really fun. And I have a plan of watching the top 10 best TOS episodes so that I know what people are talking about whenever they talk about TOS episodes. But I'm a little nervous to do it because I've like that wasn't my show. I grew up on the TNG era, so I'm a little nervous to commit to like 10 episodes of TOS and then be like, what have I gotten myself into? But I'm hoping that as I get into it, I'm going to be like, oh, this is great. This is like, my historical roots of science fiction. Um, okay, so when Grace says it's actually from Lower Decks, it's the Vexilon episode. I just saw that episode. Why don't I know what you're talking about? Maybe because I just saw it like a few days ago. Nadia says hashtag Starfleet security fail, which should be a hashtag. Like that should be a whole series of videos, just like what the heck is going on. Yay, Carlos made it. Carlos has been trying to make it to one of these for like a couple weeks. Okay. And then Nadia says, you should do a live stream to discuss the TOS pilot. I think so. A friend made a list for me of the best TOS episodes, and I think the pilot's on the list. Wait, but he told me there was like an original pilot with a different actor, and then they made another pilot. So I don't know which. I'm guessing there's two, and I don't know which one he put in the list. Anyways, okay, let's jump to number 6 on the list in our conversation of Prime Directive, Shmime Directive. Season 4, Episode 22, Half a Life. Lwaxana Troi falls in love with Dr. Timison, a scientist from a culture that mandates euthanasia at age 60. At the time, he's the foremost scientist trying to save his planet's dying star, and he's nearing a breakthrough. As he nears his resolution ceremony, Lwaxana tries to convince him to defy his people's tradition, but ultimately, he chooses to honor his cultural duty. So I actually like this Lwaxana episode, and I'm not the biggest Lwaxana episode fan when it comes to TNG, at least. I do. There's aspects of her personality that I really like, but the episodes she's in are usually episodes I don't like. But this one I do like, and I like it because I feel like it shows this human side of her where she cares about someone other than herself. Like she legitimately cares about someone else other than herself. And I really, really liked it. Like I just liked seeing that side of her where she's not just a seeming raging narcissist, right? Where she's like a regular person. I'm like, oh, this lady's kind of cool. Now in this episode, the Prime Directive is a little bit different. So this is obviously another warp capable society. Dr. Timison's people, he's trying to save their dying star and their star, like their sun, right? The sun for their planet. So if you don't have a sun, you don't have a planet. And the star's been dying for like, I don't know, a long time because stars are super old. But his people have been working on trying to save and revive and reignite the star for generations or whatever. And this is his thing. And he's the foremost scientist and he knows all the stuff. And he's like at this crucial breakthrough where he's going to turn everything around, but he's reached the age of resolution. So he's got to, and leave all his research to somebody else. And Lwaxana, of course, she doesn't stand for that because she's all about being, fabulous in 50, fabulous in 60, fabulous in 70. Like she's like, there, I just get better with age. I get better with time. So I don't even know what you're talking about. This concept of if you are too old or over some random threshold, you're useless, right? He says, however, in their culture, you got to die sometimes at some time. And he says that they've decided that the age 60 was a fair number and that by doing it that way, it's less cruel. That it would be cruel if people were just, killed at any old age, right? Because then what is it based on? And now it just seems mean. Like you're targeting people to die younger or, whatever. So he's saying like that levels the playing field. That just makes everything even. And so here's how the Prime Directive plays out here. Lwaxana is like, you are about to have a breakthrough. Your work, your research is going to save your entire planet, all of your people. And you're so close. You just need like 6 more months or, maybe another year. But if you go through this ceremony in the next 2 weeks, that's going to there's nobody who can pick up the torch. And so that's going to potentially endanger your entire planet. You have more work to do. And he was like, you know what? You're right. I do have more work to do. And Lwaxana was just very just passionate and exciting. And he was like, yeah, I think I could do this. I could start a revolution. Like he started getting really excited about it. So he asked Picard for asylum. So that way he didn't have to go back to his planet, because if he went back to his planet, he had to go through with the resolution because he was almost at the age of 60. And I don't remember whether or not Picard said yes, but I do know that the planet sent 2 warships to threaten the Enterprise on behalf of the planet to say like, no, one way or another, you're going through with this resolution. We're not going to allow you to make a mockery of all of our cultural beliefs. And Timison realized like he's not a revolutionary and he doesn't want to be a revolutionary and he doesn't want to make his family ashamed. And he doesn't, he doesn't want to go against his culture. He just wants to have a little more time to try to save all of their lives. And here's the messed up part is that if he was granted asylum, he would have been able to continue his research on the Enterprise because the planet was like, we want nothing to do with you if you don't obey our cultures and our laws and stuff. But he was like, he can still do his research and he can still save the planet. He can still save the dying star and save the planet and just live just by living a little bit longer. But the messed up part was that his government basically excommunicated him. They cut him off completely and they refused to take his calls. They were like, we don't care what research you do. We will not take any of it. We will not listen to any of it. So even if he found the cure for their dying star tomorrow, they would not accept it because of their beliefs. And they would rather have the entire planet perish rather than have one more day of him being alive. So he was like, well, kind of like you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't. So he decided to go through with it. But here's the Prime Directive part. Picard originally was like, because Lwaxana was like, you got to do something. And he said, I cannot, because of the Prime Directive, I cannot get involved in local politics or conflicts, right? This wasn't, you could call this a local law, I guess. You could also call this a local law, but it's like a local issue. And he was like, I don't have jurisdiction here. I can't get involved just because I don't think it's right or whatever. Has nothing to do with me. I can't step in. So this is beyond me until Timothy asked for asylum. And then that's a different thing, because they are like, I don't know. It seems like they're bound to grant asylum to everybody. I'm sure they can say no, but I think they always say yes. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen Picard. I've seen Picard not answer the question or not get a chance to answer the question, but I don't recall him just being straight up like, no, you can't stay. No. There was the one time with that the Klingon who brainwashed Geordi and who asked for asylum once he got caught. And Picard didn't say no. He said, of course, after the Klingons finish doing their full investigation, if they discover that you were innocent, then you can have asylum. So all that to say is, if he would have granted him asylum and Timothy would have stayed, there could have been war between, at least, I don't know if the Federation and Timothy's planet, but there would have been some fighting between the Enterprise and those two warships. So my question is, should Picard have stepped in and applied the Prime? Should he have applied the Prime Directive here, where he does not step in, does not get involved, does not grant asylum, and just lets Timothy do his own thing with his own people? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. I'm going to check the chat, and then we'll hit number 5 on the list. Nadia says, OMG, you should do a live stream to discuss the TOS pilot, which I think I already read that. And then there's another topic for a live stream, which is Starfleet security fails. Yeah, that is kind of funny. That would probably be a fun. Oh gosh, there's so many though. Because I feel like I usually try to tap out at 10 and not more than that, but I feel like there's so many Starfleet fails. That could just be like you just hit play and it's just like clips. It could just keep going. Okay, Nadia says, yes, the original pilot with Christopher Pike and Majel Barrett plays number 1. So is that the one that you're saying I should do a review of? Is the original one? Just let me know. And then Nadia also says, I would have been okay with them granting Timothy asylum. Yeah, I feel like that would have been, I can't imagine Picard just saying no. However, granting him asylum, I feel like would be just automatic fighting, right? Because there was 2 warships that were about to blow them out of the sky. So I don't know. Like, I really don't know. And I guess we never had to decide because Timothy decided to go back on his own. But here's another case where I was kind of like, for this case of saying the Prime Directive, I almost feel like the Prime Directive was too big of a word for the situation. It was more like Timothy doesn't want to die, and that's between him and his people. It has nothing to do with me. It felt more like that than like I must invoke the Prime Directive, But that's just my thoughts. Okay. So I'm not seeing anything else in the chat, so let's hit episode number 5 on the list. Season 1, Episode 22, Symbiosis. The Enterprise encounters 2 neighboring planets, one addicted to a drug produced by the other. Picard discovers the quote-unquote medicine is actually a narcotic and faces a dilemma over whether or not to end this toxic relationship. In the end, he withholds assistance, leaving both planets to decide their own fates. So this is one of my favorite episodes from Season 1. And to be fair, it's Season 1. So there's only a handful of episodes that I actually go back and ever rewatch, but this is one of them. And I think one of the reasons I really enjoy this is because of that twist that the Felicium wasn't life-saving medication, but it was actually a narcotic. I still remember that being a kid being like so shocked. Like I never saw it coming. And I still get a little bit of thrill every time I rewatch it as an adult to just be like, man, because when you watch the way they're interacting, you really are like, oh no, these people are dying and these other people are so heartless and couldn't care less. And then when you find out the real truth, you're like, these people are even worse than I thought, right? These heartless people are even worse. Like they're sitting here looking their noses down at these other people that they have totally hooked on this drug, lying to them that it's going to save that if they don't take it, they'll die and all this stuff. And you're just like, these people are the worst. Anyways, whatever. I can go on and on about symbiosis, but the reason why I picked it for this discussion is because this is another case where we get a full-on explanation, actually, from Picard to Beverly about the Prime Directive, what it means and why it's so important. And here's where he says, every single time that humanity has interfered in a culture's development or whatever, it's always a disaster. Every time it's a disaster. So in this case, he's like, we can't, in fact, so taking it back, when Beverly says, listen, it's a narcotic, and these, I think it's like the Breckons, well, I just pulled that out of nowhere, the drug dealing planet, he's like, when Beverly says these are actually narcotics and like they're pushers or whatever, when Picard and Beverly go to have a talk with them, he comes to the conclusion of, I can't stop you because I can't interfere in like local issues. So I can't do anything. I can't make you stop. I can't tell you to stop. I wish you wouldn't do it, but and I find it morally reprehensible, but I can't make you stop. And they're all like, yeah, that's what we thought. You better back off, Picard. But then later on, when the one shuttle that they have to get between the two planets, it was destroyed earlier in the episode. So they were like, well, you've got to repair one of our other shuttles. So that way we can keep this whole situation going. And Picard's like, nope, because that would be interfering. Like, so nope, sorry. Then all of a sudden the Breckons were like, how dare you? You can't interrupt our trade. You can't interrupt what we're doing. And Picard was just like, you didn't have a problem with it when it worked in your favor. Now you have a problem with it. But if I'm not going to interfere on that side, I'm not going to interfere on this side, and I will have nothing to do with it. I did think, as I was pulling those clips, I was like, wait a minute, those drug dealers are now going to be stranded on this planet because there's no shuttle for them to go back and forth. So I did have that thought. And the other thing is, I have always wanted a Where Are They Now for this episode in particular. I was always just so curious because the planet that's now addicted to drugs used to be super technologically advanced, and the other planet was not. They were kind of like the subservient planet, or just like the less evolved planet or whatever, as far as technology goes. But once they had this power dynamics flip, since this entire planet is now hooked on drugs, they stopped creating new technologies. Like all of their culture development just kind of slowed down. And the other one, because they're getting so much profit from this planet, is just like excelling, right? So it's like the tables have turned. But now that the ships are down and they'll have to come up with a way to see each other. They have to build a new ship. It's going to drive innovation on both sides, because on one side, they're like, we have to build a new ship or we're going to die. On the other side, they're like, we have to build a new ship or we're going to lose our only source of income. But at the same time, once this planet of drug addicts goes through withdrawal and comes out on the other side, they might be like, wait a minute, we don't want to get hooked on that again, or we don't want anything to do with that planet, or even we need to go to war with that planet for what they did to us. They lied to us. They told us we would die and we did it, or something. Like there's so many avenues where the storyline could have gone, I feel like. And I've always wanted to know. And I was catching up on Lower Decks this weekend, and they had an episode about like going back to visit these two planets. And I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, yes. Like I've always wanted a Where Are They Now? And I finally got it, even though it was just a little piece of an episode. It just made my heart happy. And that's just one reason why I absolutely freaking love that show is I feel like it just like, it gets me, it feels like my Star Trek bestie. Anyways, all right, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to hit number 4 on the list of Prime Directive, Shmime Directive episodes. Carlos says, in real life, if you ask for asylum and they let you on the ship, then they've got to help you. And I think that Starfleet isn't like that. That actually makes a lot of sense. If you ask for asylum and they let you board, then it's that basically they're agreeing. They'll be like, yes, you have asylum. So that's like, we're going to protect you. We're going to take you to someplace safe, and hide you away or whatever. Like you've been granted asylum. In this case where somebody's trying to hunt you, trying to like hunt you down. But in another case where it's like, maybe like I have a friend who's a refugee from a country that was having a lot of war and conflict when he was a kid. So in that case, when he was granted asylum, it was more like, refugee status. It wasn't necessarily anyone specific was looking for him specifically. But again, it was this idea of protection. In this case, though, Dr. Timothy was already on the Enterprise doing research. They were helping him with his star-saving research. So he didn't he didn't ask for asylum and then come to the ship. He was already on the ship. And when he realized he had to go back, he was like, Captain Picard, can I have asylum? Like he did it real quick. And so it's kind of like, oh, shoot, you're already here. And that's, hence the warships coming to be like, give him back to us or else. When Grace says, I kind of like that this episode didn't face a happy ending, even if I'm not sure I agree. And that, again, was the last episode with Dr. Timothy. Yeah, it did not have a happy ending. It was sad. Dr. Timothy went back to his planet and died. The end. Like the episode ends with him getting on the transporter and like leaving. And actually, when I was getting the clips, he's on the transporter about to leave, and Picard's, graciously saying goodbye. But everyone on the ship knows that Luoxana fell in love with Timothy. So Timson's kind of looking around and Luoxana's not there. And Picard's like, we can linger in the transporter room for just a couple more minutes if you want to. Hint, hint, kind of like giving him a chance to say goodbye to Luoxana. But they had a really tearful, huggy goodbye earlier before he even came to this room. So he's like, no, that's fine. And then he just like goes back to the planet to, be resolved. And it's really sad. It's really bittersweet. I think if they would have done some kind of happy ending, like everything works out, I think it would have cheapened the message. Um, yeah, because we already have two levels of kind of sadness. We've got the level of the dying star, which is terrifying, and then we've got this level of the dying man, right? And it's like this global, the A plot and the B plot are super aligned in this episode, and it's kind of a mix of loss and grief and maybe even fear with love and appreciation and value and respect because time is short. I think it was a beautifully told story, and I think if there was a happy ending, it wouldn't have been as meaningful. Okay. Nadia says, okay, what would you choose? Right to abortion or requirement to have a resolution end your life at 60? You know what's interesting about that question about abortion? I was watching with, for the first time, I was watching with a couple friends of mine a couple years ago. We were going through Battlestar Galactica from the one from 2004 or whatever. I had never seen this show. I don't know where I was in 2004 because this show was incredible, but we were watching it as a group of friends. We were watching it once a week, like when it aired in real time. And it took us like 2.5 years to watch all of the seasons. But that issue, the issue of abortion, or not actually, it was the opposite, because in Battlestar Galactica, little spoiler, it's like there's only one ship, there's only a small amount of humans left and they're fighting for their lives. And so the idea was that they had to outlaw any abortion or anything like that. Like all babies had to be born because the human race was so small. Right. And it was like, you're not allowed to have that choice because this is like an emergency situation and there's only so many humans left. And so that's just it's a really interesting conversation in, in this case in Star Trek, it's like post scarcity, everything's great, plenty of humans to go around. Like we don't have the same issue. It's not gritty and like dark and painful and traumatic the way that Battlestar Galactica life is. But I do think it's an interesting question that some of the issues we deal with today, some of them have to do with like logistical things, space on the planet, interpersonal relationships. Like some of the things are logistical. And in a post-scarcity society, a lot of those things don't matter because they can be addressed so easily. But in a situation like Battlestar Galactica, it's like the opposite. It's even more scarce than a planet. There's even fewer resources. There's even fewer resources means more competition, which means less agency, less choice. Now, on Dr. Timson's planet, the resolution seems to be not, maybe that's logistical too. Maybe that came from a population control point of mind of like, as opposed to normally now how population control is handled is people, governments control birth rates. They don't allow people to have more kids. But equally, the other way it could work is that people are not allowed to live past a certain point. Like either way, that has the same result where there's only a certain amount of people who are allowed to be alive in this particular space. And so that's what his planet has done. I don't know why. I don't know if they explain why, or if it's just like that's just a thing and they just, we just assume there's backstory to it. But because it is a logistical thing or it's a thing they do, it's also steeped in their cultural traditions, right? So now it's more than logistics because apparently they have warp capability too. So presumably they have, their post scarcity as well. But now it's steeped in their culture and what it means to be them and how they function in the world and all these things. So by saying no to the resolution, you're turning your back on your whole people. And we saw what happens. Their whole people turned their back on him, and he would be the only one of his kind in, on the Enterprise or wherever he decided to go after that, because he would never be allowed home, which is super sad. So really, this poor guy just can't win. But to answer your question, yeah, they both suck. Both those choices suck. Yeah. Neither one is good. I don't want anybody to decide when I do anything if I can avoid it. As long as it doesn't affect other people, I don't want anybody else to take those choices. I want to be as close to post-scarcity as possible so that everybody, to me, post-scarcity just means options, right? It means options. It means resources. It means choices. It means space, not, well, physical, yes, space, but I mean like abundance is what it means. Nadia says, I love Picard's decision in this one. So clever. We can call it Prime Directive adjacent. Yes, Prime Directive adjacent is a couple of these episodes. Wait, okay, so Randall says Picard refusing to help Kirk's son. What are you talking about? Was one of the actors wait, Randall, I need you to unpack that. Let me know what you're talking about here because I need to know more about what's going on in that statement. Nadia says Battlestar Galactica was so good, but I didn't like how it ended. Yeah, same. Same. It was so good until the end, and then it was like so bad. But man, I don't even care that the end. I mean, I do care that the ending was bad because like that was sad, but the show itself is like perfection. Like the storytelling was beautiful. Michelle was there. Whoop whoop! Shout out to the Sci-Fi Matters Club. Yep, she was one of the OGs walking us through Battlestar Galactica. She's seen it a million times. I hadn't seen it before. A couple other friends hadn't seen it before. So that was a really fun time. Okay, let's hit episode number 4 on the list of Prime Directive conversations. Season 5, Episode 3, Ensign Ro. Ensign Ro joins the Enterprise to help locate a Bajoran terrorist as ordered by Admiral Kennelly. He gives her an offer she can't refuse, but also, since he's shady AF, he makes her question who she can trust. Naturally, Guinan saves the day by getting Ro to open up to Picard, and they all work together to uncover the truth. This is one of my favorite episodes of TNG. Like, I absolutely love this episode. I feel like I talk about it every single week. So okay, but let me take it back. Before I just start gushing about why I love this episode, the reason we're talking about it today is because of how the Prime Directive plays into this conversation / doesn't play into this conversation. And I think this is something that it really bothers me. But before I get to that, I just want to get Randall's comment. The actor in the drug addiction episode is Kirk's son in Wrath of Khan. Thank you for that. So I did not know any of that. So thank you for explaining that because I was like, because sometimes they're like their actual like biological children or actors in the show sometimes too, and I'm like, what's going on? Okay, so in this case, there's several levels. So this falls into the use case, the Prime Directive use case of do not get involved in local conflicts, in local politics or local conflicts. So that is this. We've got the Cardassians and we've got the Bajorans who are their planets being occupied. They're refugees. They're kind of scattered to the wind. They don't have a home. And so there are little terrorist cells that have popped up of these refugees who are fighting back against the Cardassians. So that's the part where Starfleet is saying, that's got nothing to do with us. That's between the Bajorans and the Cardassians. That has nothing to do with us. But then, so how did Ensign Ro get into Starfleet? I don't even know. Like, how did she even get into it? I don't know. I mean, she does, no, I was going to say she talks about how she gets into it, but she doesn't, I don't think. Does she? Does she in this episode? I don't know. Somehow she gets into Starfleet of all things. And when they go to her planet, or when they go to the planet to look for this terrorist, we see all these kids running around in like this refugee camp. And she's like, what they need is, blankets, food, water, just like kind of humanitarian aid. And I feel like, and Picard's kind of like, yeah, we could do that. We could do that, but no more. We could do that. And it's kind of like, okay. So what constitutes interfering? Does interfering mean giving them help in any way, shape, or form? Because clearly Cardassia is like super, 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 super powerful, and Bajora is like not, right? So like clearly there's a huge power imbalance. So we're giving blankets and stuff to the Bajorans. We're definitely not giving blankets to the Cardassians, right? Like that's what we're saying. So I'm like, I'm not really sure about the level of involvement or non-involvement here. However, here's why Ro agreed to do this, because Admiral Kennelly promise weapons. And I know for sure weapons is a no-no. That is for sure getting involved in a conflict, right? If there's medicines or blankets or whatever, I guess it's okay. Like, I think it's okay. A lot of times in wars, unfortunately, there's always a war somewhere. Humanitarian missions can go to both sides and drop off medicines and blankets and water and stuff like that, for the civilians who are impacted. And that's usually fine. I mean, they're not dropping it off to the troops, right? It's to the civilians who don't, they're not a part of the fight, but they are a part of the casualty count. And I think that's usually fine. But I know arms is like, that's a no-no. Like you can't do that. So in this case, Admiral Kennelly was like, we'll do that, right? He's like, as long as you find Orta, we'll give you guns and all kinds of stuff. We'll give you phasers and disruptors and all kinds of stuff. And That's the only reason why Ro agreed, because she was like, this is what's really going to help. Yeah, thanks for the blanket and all, but we need to stop being occupied. We need a home. We need ability to fight back. That's what we really need. And so that's what got her in the sticky situation in the first place. Now, this is another one, as Nadia would say, this is like a Prime Directive adjacent, because Picard does not employ the Prime Directive here, but he does say to Ro, like, we can't get involved too much because of the Prime Directive. And then when she comes to him and is like, Admiral Kennelly told me to go find Orta and that he would give me weapons and like stuff we could actually use in our fight against Cardassia. And Picard was like, I can't believe that. No Admiral in Starfleet would ever do such a thing. Ugh. You know, he's like, because that totally violates the Prime Directive and every Admiral would know better. But Admiral Kennelly was totally like, screw the Prime Directive, because and I don't know if he ever delivered on the weapons, because I don't know what the agreement was. Here's how I think it goes. I think that Admiral Kennelly was like, look, Ro, if you get Orta out, like get him out of hiding, I promise him I will give him all these weapons and stuff like that. And I promise you I'll give it to him. And then what he was going to do is, as soon as Ro was like, okay, I've got Orta, he's on my ship, he was going to tell the Cardassians and they were going to blow up the ship. So I don't think he was ever going to deliver on the weapons. So technically he was never going to break the Prime Directive, in the sense that he's not providing arms to one side of a conflict. However, he'd be absolutely breaking the Prime Directive by killing Orta in the first place, because you are involving yourself in a local conflict. You should have nothing to do with Orta. If you're not going to be stopping the Cardassians from what they're doing to the Bajorans, you also shouldn't be stopping the Bajorans from what they're doing to the Cardassians, right? Like, if you're not involved, you're not involved. You don't get to pick and choose where you get to be involved and how you get to be involved, depending on whether or not your star base is hit. And that's what happened, is one of the Starfleet star bases got hit. The Cardassian told Kennelly it was Orta. And then Kennelly believed him and was like, we got to find Orta and get revenge. And so that was like the whole big plot, which Picard skillfully unraveled the whole thing and just blew up his spot. And apparently he was court-martialed, but that's another Where Are They Now that I never got. I would have loved to see the court-martial. I mean, sort of loved. It probably would have been really boring TV. But I would have liked to hear something in his captain's log, you know, of like, Admiral Kennelly has been stripped down to ensign or whatever. In fact, at the end of the episode, Picard does say something about like, he'll probably face a court-martial or something like that to Ensign Ro. And she's like, well, if he ends up in the same penal colony that I was in, tell him to avoid the West Wing because it gets really hot or whatever. Like, that would have just been like such great irony if he ended up in that same penal colony. And that was like the little line we got at the end. But whatever, they weren't trying to go that dark. So I'm gonna check the chat and the comments. Let me know if you feel like. So this one I can't say if it was right for Picard to apply the Prime Directive because he didn't have to, and really it was Kennelly who was breaking the Prime Directive left and right, but he actually didn't. But he was planning to. So I guess I can't quite ask that question. But I'm gonna check the chat for any of your thoughts, and then we're gonna hit episode number 3 on the list. Okay, so Carlos says, doesn't she join the Maquis terrorist group? Yes, she does. So in the very end, in season 7, I don't know what episode, but it's called Preemptive Strike. Towards the end, maybe it's like episode 22 or something. It's like towards the end of season 7, towards the end of the whole show. Picard asks Ro to go undercover to find this Maquis terrorist cell because they have some plots against a fleet of Starfleet ships, I'm thinking, that were coming in to do something, to send supplies or something like that. And so she infiltrated them. And while she was in the middle of infiltrating them, a bunch of Cardassians showed up on this. It was like an outpost. So, okay, here's what happened. Let me take a step back. Here's what happened. So there's like this neutral zone area. The neutral zone is supposed to be the space between like Federation space and Cardassian space. And then there's like a neutral zone between Federation space and Romulan space and Federation space, you know, et cetera. There's a bunch of neutral zones. But the neutral zone between the Romulan and Federation space is like this, right? This side's all Federation, this side's all Romulan or Cardassian. And then in the middle, like, you know, it's kind of a no man's land where people can go back and forth, but you try to like avoid that middle spot. So where that middle spot is, there are a bunch of planets, okay? And they redrew the lines. They had some kind of political like agreement. They had an agreement between the Federation and the Cardassian Empire to they made some concessions, and so they redrew the lines of the neutral zone. So instead of it being kind of like a line and there's like planets on this side and planets on this side, now the line's like this. And right, the planets that used to be Federation planets are now Cardassian planets. And planets that used to be Cardassian planets are now Federation planets. So because they redrew those lines and the both groups agreed to it, both governments agreed to it, everyone on those planets had to move. So they were like, hey, if you're on a Cardassian planet, you got to pick up, move over to now a new Federation planet and vice versa. So apparently people didn't like that. They didn't like being told they had to move from their planet. And so a lot of fighting ensued. So the Cardassians would show up on the Federation planets and they'd be like, why aren't you off our planet yet? Get off our planet. And they would like shoot them and stuff like that. Even though there's supposed to be a certain amount of time for this transition to happen, there was just increased conflict over it. And then vice versa, of course. Like, you know, so there was just like a lot of fighting. The Maquis kind of were birthed out of that situation where they were like, this is our planet. This is our space. The Cardassians are not going to come in here and take this over the way they did to Bajora. So it's a lot of displaced Bajorans who are mad at the Cardassians. It's a lot of people who are on these outposts who are just regular folks who are joining the Maquis so they can fight for their homes. And then it's a lot of former Starfleet officers who just feel like this whole situation was messed up and Starfleet should have had more of a hand in it, I guess. And they feel sympathy for the Bajorans and for the colonists who now have to move or who are trying to defend their land. And so that's kind of where the Maquis birthed from. It was this grassroots guerrilla warfare style situation that was supposed to fight off this big bad enemy of the Cardassians. So in the end, Ro does join the Maquis because she feels like that's the right thing to do. Her, along with many, many, many other Starfleet scientists, Starfleet officers, join. At some point, she unjoins because we do see her again in Picard season 3. Yeah, because right, nobody was in season 2. Yes, we see her in Picard season 3, and she's back in uniform. So we're like, oh snap, she came back or something like that. And then we do get a scene with closure between Picard and Ensign Ro in Picard season 3. But we did not know that was going to happen. That was 30 years after the show already wrapped. So nobody knew that we were going to get any resolution. But there's one time where we did get a where are they now? And I'm here for it. Okay, now that being said, let's hit episode number 3 on the list. Season 3, Episode 4, Who Watches the Watchers? A Federation observation post accidentally becomes visible to the pre-warp Mintakans. Beverly violates the Prime Directive by saving Liko's life on the Enterprise. Ultimately, the memory wipe doesn't work, and he convinces his people that Picard is a god. Picard then asks to be shot to prove his mortality and informs them that the outpost will be removed so they can continue to develop naturally. So this is an episode that falls into that primary use case for the Prime Directive, which is do not get involved with pre-warp cultures. Don't mess with their society. Don't contact them. Don't talk to them because you might change their evolution. Now, in this case, it wasn't the whole entire culture. It was like one village, but still. And you could see all the damage that was done in this case because the level of technology was so far apart. I think if they're pre-warp, but they're like, so we saw in that episode First Contact, if you haven't seen that episode in a while, don't watch it, it sucks. But in that episode First Contact, that society is like, they're on the cusp of warp. Like they are about to create warp technology in the next few days. So the Enterprise is there getting ready for First Contact. Like they're like close enough in technology where finding out that that aliens exist, that there are other planets out there might not be that big of a stretch. It turns out in that episode, it was still a big stretch and they needed to wait quite a bit longer before they did First Contact, that the people were not ready for that information. But in this case, these people are at the Bronze Age level of technological development. So I don't even know what that means. I just heard that in the episode. I think it means no electricity and like running water and stuff. I don't know. It's just very old timey. Like everything's very old timey and they do everything with torches or whatever. So this big jump in technology is way too far of a jump. So naturally, these are like proto-Vulcans. These are from that same line genetically somehow. So like that's why they all look like Romulan or whatever. I think they're proto-Romulans maybe. But anyways, this jump is really huge. No surprise that the Mintakans would assume that Picard's a god, that all of the people in the Enterprise are gods because they can do this amazing stuff. They can disappear and reappear and, heal somebody with a touch of something, something to their neck. And it's pretty miraculous. So in the end, Lico's like, if you're not really a god, then I'm going to shoot you with a bow and arrow. And if you die, then that proves that you're not really God. It's kind of like the Salem witch trials, right? Where it's like, I think you're a witch. I'm going to set you on fire. And if you don't die, then you are a witch. But if you do die, then I'll know you weren't a witch after all. Oops. It was kind of like that mentality where it's like, we're going to shoot you with a bow and arrow. And if you do die, we'll know you weren't a god. We'll figure it out. Thankfully, his daughter, as you saw, pushed him at the last second, and it ended up hitting Picard's shoulder. And so he didn't die, thankfully, but he did bleed. And that was enough to convince Lico that he's actually not a god, because he was like, gods can't bleed. And how is Picard bleeding and all of this? And so Picard was basically, and Picard had also taken, not Lico, but another, like the leader, the chief of that village or whatever, had taken her to the Enterprise to show her around and to show her, like, we're not gods. We just have technology. We have advanced technology. That's all. And even takes her to sick bay where she sees a crewman die. And they're like, see, we can't bring everybody back to life. Like, the only reason we were able to save Lico is because he looked pretty dead to me. So I'm not totally sure how they were able to save Lico, but not this other person. But let's just say he wasn't that far gone or something. They were able to bring Lico back. But this crewman in the sick bay, they weren't. And so that's when she was convinced. She was like, okay, if you guys can die, then you're not gods. And she was trying to convince Lico when Picard took them back to the planet, but he was like, no. And then as soon as he started bleeding, she touched his shoulder and she held up her hand and saw, he saw the blood and he was like, oh my gosh. And he totally freaked out because he was like, I almost killed somebody. Right. So it's like, he's not a bad person. He's not a bad guy. He just was amazed, was mesmerized by this level of technology, understandably so, and needed a really big object lesson to prove that Picard was just another person, was a human, but like an alien. So in this case, the Prime Directive says they shouldn't have contacted the Mintakans at all. But the reason they did was because there was a Starfleet outpost that was studying the Mintakans and their, like, development and, like, their culture and stuff like that, kind of like the Nature Channel, right? But the hide, the blind that they were in, malfunctioned and, like, caught fire or whatever. And the little the hologram that created a fake wall face cover over their observation space disappeared. And so then it became visible to Lico and his daughter, and they couldn't get it back up in time. And there's, like, smoke and sparks and fire and all that stuff. So they couldn't hide. And at that same time, one of the crewmen, like, jumped out the window, I guess, because he thought he was going to catch fire. I don't know. Jumped out the window, rolled down the mountain, got lost in the woods. And then the villagers ended up finding him. Point is, at this point, there was no way for them to hide. So I guess the lesson here, the moral of the story here is, if you're studying a pre-warp culture, you might need to study them from orbit. You might not be able to be in the thick of things, to be in a hillside, 10 miles from their village. You might need to be in orbit. And I feel like that's fine. Like, why did they have to be so close? Did they have to be so close? And also, because, if you're from orbit, if you're far enough in orbit, they can't even see you. Because at this stage of technology, I'm assuming they don't have any way to look at the stars with any kind of, like, depth or anything, so they wouldn't be able to be like, what's that star? You know what I mean? So they didn't even need to be on that planet. Also, in this episode, we see the classic surgical reconstruction. So you look exactly like a local trope, which I love that trope. So we see Riker and Troy go down disguised as Mintakans to blend with the people. Now that always makes me nervous, because I'm like, yes, you look like the people, but you don't talk like the people and you don't act like the people. You are going to be found out immediately, but somehow they never are. Anyways, if you really need to be that close, if you're studying these people and you really need to be that close, then maybe that's the way to go. Surgically alter yourself, come in as a traveler, hang out for like a week, and then head off. Like, you don't want to get into a situation like Nikolai Rashenko, where you're impregnating one of the locals and introducing your DNA into their genetic evolution. But yeah, so maybe the problem here was just being too close. In this specific case, I think the Prime Directive makes a lot of sense. When there is a pre-warp society, you should not be like, hey guys, look at me, I got a phaser. You know what I mean? Like, you should not be showing your technology there, because it's just going to cause a lot of confusion. I think it's easy for them to be seen as gods moving forward. Like, Picard could have stepped into that role and been like, I am your god, or whatever. But I also feel like the fact that they were there and said, hey, aliens exist, I don't know, did that alter their culture for the rest of eternity in a terrible way? Maybe. but maybe not. All it did was told them that they're not the only ones in the universe. And some people take that as a comforting thought. Some people take that as a potential threat. So I don't know. That knowledge could have repercussions. We don't get where are they now, and I'm totally cool with that. Yeah, I think Picard did the best he could do in that situation. But that's one where it's like, well, the Prime Directive would have been to do nothing, but that was too late. So now they had to just like roll with it. But nobody was breaking the Prime Directive on purpose in this episode. Okay, I'm going to check the chat, and then we're going to hit number 2 on the list. Wingrace says, I got so caught up in the description that I totally forgot to comment on anything. I actually just thought you'd left, Wingrace, but glad you're still here. Nadia says, LOL, you might need to study them from orbit. I totally agree. You know they could see everything. It always seems like they could see everything. Do you remember that episode? It's called The Survivors with Kevin and Rashawn, where there's like the one patch of grass and like the whole rest of the planet is devastated, right? But from orbit, they could see the patch of grass. And he even says in the episode, it's like 1 acre of land or something like that. You cannot see 1 acre of land from space like that. But he could see it, right? Like they could see it in the Enterprise. They were just like, magnify. They could see the house. They could see Kevin and Rashawn drinking lemonade on the back porch. You could see everything from orbit. So you do not need to be that close to study your subjects, is what I'm thinking. Ooh, and Nadia says, or borrow cloaking technology because the Federation does not have cloaking technology. Borrow it from the Klingons. Or suits they could wear down on the surface, or surgical alterations. Yeah, let me think. Did they have? Yeah, in TNG. Oh, I'm trying to think of if they have this in any Star Trek series. Does anybody have a suit that cloaks the body? Like not a cloak for the ship, but a cloaking suit, a suit that makes you entirely invisible. I don't think so. But that'd be so cool. Like, that would be really cool. But I feel like that's worse. I feel like you should not be walking. It'd be better for you to be surgically altered and mingle with the people. I think that would be better and less invasive than you being in an invisibility suit, because it is inevitable that you're going to trip over something or run into somebody or something, and people are going to think it's a ghost. They're being haunted. You know, a bird's going to poop on you, and the poop's just going to be hanging in the middle of the air. It's just going to, like, it's inevitable that suit is going to cause serious problems and you're going to be found out immediately. So I think it's better to just like blend with the people than any of the other things that they were trying. Nadia says, freaking Nikolai is the Prime Directive public enemy number 1. Carlos says, I think Picard secretly liked being a god. Maybe he, I don't know if Picard actually would like that kind of attention. I think some other captains might be like, oh, yeah. But I think Picard was more like, no, that's ridiculous. No. You know, I think he'd poo-poo it. Other people on the ship who I think would be like, all right, bring it. I think Riker would have been okay with that. I mean, he wouldn't have been because, you know, Prime Directive. But I think he would have said in 10 Forward afterwards, like, man, that sure was nice. So I think he would have liked it. I think Troy would have been extremely uncomfortable. I think Beverly would have been uncomfortable. I think Wesley would have been super awkward. And they would have been like, nah, man, we don't want you that's God after all, because you're tripping. I think Guinan would have been amazing. I think she would have just rolled with it. Like she would have just rolled with it until, you know, rescue came or whatever. She would have just been like, hey, just whatever makes them happy. Who else do I think would have been? I think O'Brien would have been like, what the? But I would watch that episode. I would totally watch that episode. Who else is on the ship? Yeah, that would have been interesting. It's just to see who would be like cool with that and who would be like, no. Nadia says, I was totally thinking of Survivors. Yep, we were on the same page with that. Wingrace says, zoom, enhance, and done. Exactly. Enhance. There they are. Let's just watch them. I mean, presumably that's what they were doing from that tower, was just like, just watching them, right? Wingrace says Insurrection had cloaking suits. Oh, okay. I was like, I just watched Insurrection, but no, I just watched Nemesis. I haven't seen Insurrection in years. Who had the cloaking suits? Do you remember? Because, man, that sounds so cool. Like, I need to go back and look at it. Nadia says, a bird's going to poop on you and the poop will hang in the air. OMG, I love you, Charisse. You know that's going to happen. Like, it's inevitable. It's inevitable and it's gross. And it's going to happen. And it's like, you're going to be found out very easily. Nadia says, Guinan probably is a god on other planets. That's actually true. She probably is. And she probably just doesn't share it because she's humble like that. She doesn't need to tell people that sort of thing. When Grace says, Barclay would have been an interesting god to follow. Oh my gosh. I would watch that episode too. I would watch Barclay. I would watch O'Brien, and I would watch Guinan. Those 3 scenarios I would absolutely watch just to see. Like, I think Guinan's would just be so cool. And I think O'Brien would be kind of like, what? Like, I don't know. I just would see him kind of fighting it. And I think Barclay would just be like, okay. Okay. Like, I think you just go with it until they get to the part where they have to sacrifice him to the volcano or something like that. I think he'd be like, wait a minute. What volcano? You know, I would totally watch. I would watch all 3 of those. I think it'd be so much fun. Nadia says O'Brien does become a religious figure for society in an episode of DS9. I'm not surprised. It had to happen at some point. And I do have a plan for tackling all of DS9 because I've not seen all of DS9 yet. Wingrace says Insurrection was based on this episode. Starfleet scientists cloaked a planet to spy on the natives, and Data went rogue. They cloaked a planet? Wait, did they cloak a planet or did they cloak themselves? You know what? I'm gonna have to just rewatch it. I don't remember loving Insurrection, and I only saw it once, I believe. That's why I'm kind of like, what happened in that movie? Okay, let's hit number 2 on the list. Season 2, Episode 15, Pen Pals. Data befriends a young alien girl from a planet facing extinction. Although this planet is pre-warp, Picard agrees to send Data to the planet to move the girl to safety. He brings her to the Enterprise instead. In the end, Wesley's team restores balance on the planet, Dr. Pulaski wipes Sarjenka's memories, and Data returns the sleeping girl safely to her bed. So this episode, I think, is really sweet. You know, it's the Data Gets a Friend episode. And I also love the idea of pen pals. We used to have pen pals when I was in elementary school, and I always thought it was very exotic, you know, to talk to some kid across the country, across the world, and to hear about their lives and kind of, you know, what kinds of stuff they eat and just what kinds of shows they watch and, you know, the questions that little kids ask. So just the idea of pen pals I find to be very romantic, not romantic in any kind of sexual way, but romantic in the sense of like grand and lovely and wonderful. In this case, it wasn't really grand or lovely or wonderful. It was a little weird. But, you know, I think it's sweet that Data found a friend, and this girl is very adorable. I think she's totally adorable. And she's just like, Data, you want to help me? You're saving my planet. Thank you, Data. I don't know. It's just really cute. But in this case, this is another major Prime Directive case. Cannot put this on Picard's shoulders, though. This was totally Data. So this little girl has some kind of like ham radio, and she's trying to speak to. I don't know. I don't remember the context. I don't remember if she's using the ham radio to talk to outer life, to outer space life, or if she's using the ham radio and she thinks she's talking to some other person on the planet. I don't know. But I do know her parents never taught her about stranger danger, because she's talking to this random grown man on this radio, just talking up a storm. Apparently they're chatting back and forth, sending messages for a month. And then when Data arrives to save her, because she's, you know, sending him messages, Data, help me, my planet's dying. You know, she's freaking out. When Data goes to help her, he finds her, but where are her parents? We don't see her parents at any point in this entire episode. She's at home, like running around trying to grab her dolly and get her favorite stuff before her home burns in this volcanic eruption that's happening right out of her front door. Her parents are nowhere to be found. So yeah, that's not a Prime Directive issue, though. That's just a parenting issue. So the Prime Directive issue is that this culture is very much pre-warp. And when they come into this system, they're studying all these M-class planets that have like a short life cycle because they all have a lot of tectonic activity. And so they're studying all these planets, and Wesley is like, he's put in charge of a team for the first time ever. And it's his job to figure out why these planets are so unstable and stuff like that, which is a really good B plot to weave into this A plot, because Sarjenka's home happens to be one of those super unstable planets, and it is facing extinction by the time they come to it. Like the earthquakes are getting so bad, the volcanoes are erupting left and right, like the planet is donezo. It's on its last legs. And the Enterprise comes just in time. And because Data's formed this friendship with Sarjenka, he's kind of like, come on, Picard, come on. You can't just let them all die. And he's like, Prime Directive, I cannot interfere because Prime Directive. But he gives in and he's like, all right, all right. They shoot 5 torpedoes and save the entire planet. It ends all tectonic problems on their planet. And it's like, this is the problem that I have. So I get non-interference with a pre-warp culture because you don't want to mess up their evolution, right? But if the entire culture is gone, there's no evolution to mess up, right? Like it especially they could shoot those 5 torpedoes without ever letting anyone on the planet know that aliens exist. So they're still not affecting the cultural development other than allowing it to happen, allowing it to continue. So I'm really glad they broke the Prime Directive in this case. I think Sarjenka's adorable. I have a friend who cannot stand Sarjenka at all, and it's just because she has those weird long fingers. She's just like, oh, I don't want to see her, but I'm like, but she's like such a cute little girl. Anyways, but what do you think? Do you think Picard made the right call here? Because this was definitely a violation of the Prime Directive, and it wasn't even his fault. It was Data's fault. But he, as the captain, has the final say. He could be like, sorry, Data, send her back. He could have easily done that, and he didn't. So do you think he made the right call to break the Prime Directive in this case? Let me know in the comments and let me know in the chat. And then we're going to hit the number 1 episode on today's list of Prime Directive episodes. So Wingrace says cloaked on a planet, and that's a conversation about insurrection. So, I don't know if I need to go. See, part of me though, Wingrace, I'm like, I want to go see it because I want to see the cloak. But the other part of me is like, I remember very much not loving that episode, not loving that movie. So part of me is like, maybe I shouldn't go watch it again because maybe I'll be very disappointed. Maybe I'll love the cloak and hate everything else. I don't know. Randall says, oh, hold up. I missed Randall's. Oops. Hold on. Randall says, O'Brien's struggling to make the Dalrock go away. Carlos says, oops, I missed Carlos. Sorry. Carlos says, I thought they were allowed to help as long as they don't get found out. Nope, they're not. If it's pre-warp, they're not. And then that's the thing. If they're pre-warp, they're not. If they had warp technology, save their planet all day long. But if they're pre-warp, no. Wingrace says, why did they give all the alien children who befriended crew long fingers? First her, and then the guy with Riker in Future Imperfect. Yeah, that's a good point. So Sarjenka had those long fingers, and the guy in Future Imperfect looked the most like an X-Files alien of like all the aliens on Star Trek, which is kind of funny. He had like the gray skin and the big eyes and like the head that has like a tiny little chin and a really big forehead, and it's all bald. So he had like that classic X-Files alien look. But there was that other kid who befriended Data in the episode called Hero Worship that they found on some like a freighter or whatever, some ship where everybody died except for this one little kid. And he didn't have long fingers because he was human. But yeah, your question was alien kids. I don't know why the alien kids are all messed up. Alexander's adorable, but he's a Klingon. And I don't think we see any other non-human kids on TNG, at least, even though we see a lot of kids. The other kids are like human kids or like shape-shifting human kids, that sort of thing. Nadia says, yeah, saving Sarjenka's planet was against the Prime Directive, but it was the moral thing to do. Yeah, I agree. I think it was the right thing to do. Every time they face this dilemma, I'm going to be like, save the planet. Like, save them, because the whole thing is like, the only reason we're not saving them is because they're pre-warp. That's the only reason. But then if they had warp capability, they'd probably also have the capability to save their own planet from these earthquakes, right? So it's a little bit chicken and the egg to me. Wingrace says, I don't know if I'd call Alexander normal, but I take your point. Alexander's fingers are normal. So let's be specific. Okay, let's hit the number 1 episode on the list. Season 7, Episode 13, Homeward. Worf's foster brother, Nikolai Rozhenko, violates the Prime Directive to save a pre-warp village from a dying planet by secretly transporting them to the Enterprise's holodeck. Worf and Nikolai work together to lead the Barallans on a long journey to their new village, while the Enterprise rushes to the nearest uninhabited M-class planet. Vorin accidentally exits the holodeck and is shocked by what he finds. He decides to commit ritual suicide rather than live a lie with his people. So this episode, we've already referenced it here. This to me is like a do-over from Sarjenka's planet. And this is where they make the wrong call. Like the right call was like, shoot 5 torpedoes and save the planet and keep it moving. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't reveal aliens exist. You didn't mess with the again, the only messing with their culture you did was allowing their culture to continue so that it can evolve. In this case, to me, this was like hashtag fail, that this whole planet had to die because they were pre-warp. And I just feel like, again, you could have, they didn't even need 5 torpedoes, I'm sure, because we've seen episodes where they've reestablished the ionosphere, the like atmosphere of a planet. We've seen that before. So they probably could have used like a canister of something that they just shot into the atmosphere and it dissolved, and particulates and chemicals and science, and then their whole atmosphere was better. Like that, the fix for this, I'm sure they didn't need to call in Starfleet scientists from the Daystrom Institute. They had the technology right there on the Enterprise, just like they did for Sarjenka's planet. Granted, Wesley's team created the solve for that, and we don't have Wesley on the show at this point, but you still have Geordi and Data and all these super smart people. They could have definitely found a resolution, a cure, a solution for this planet to allow it to continue. And to me, that's just like humanitarian aid. Other than, as opposed to letting this entire planet be wiped out because they're pre-warp. I just don't think that's fair. Now, on the other hand, what is Nikolai doing? What is he doing? Like, I don't think, I mean, he's a Starfleet scientist or something, right? Because that's why he's on this planet. He's supposed to be studying these people. And he definitely, he did not learn from, he didn't totally learn from the mistakes of the people with the Mintakans. He sort of did, in the sense that he surgically altered himself and inserted himself amongst the people to get to know them and to study them or whatever. He thought this is the best way to not get caught, which I agree with. But he went a little too far by impregnating one of the colonists and introducing his DNA into their genetic, into the gene pool. And then when he rescued some people from the planet, he only rescued the village that included his, pregnant girlfriend, or maybe wife. And it was like, if he hadn't impregnated her, would he have saved anyone? I don't know. So it doesn't feel like on his part it was super humanitarian. On his part, it's pretty selfish. But his selfishness saved a handful of people that would not have been saved otherwise. But because he introduced his genes, and then he decided to stay with them on their on the new planet that they landed on, and imagine it's only a village full of people that are going to repopulate this entire planet. Like, that is not enough genetic diversity. So whatever they become culturally and genetically is now no longer what it was. So in fact, that little sampling that was taken, it did the damage that the Prime Directive exists to prevent. However, I think not just like firing off a couple canisters and restoring their entire atmosphere, I think that was totally wrong. And I don't see how that, like, I don't see how the admirals and stuff like that could be like, yeah, you did the right thing. I mean, of course they're going to say that because it's a Prime Directive, right? But I feel like they should be like, no, that's the wrong thing. Like, there's exceptions to the rules. Do not involve yourself in their culture. Don't mess up their evolution, but don't let them all die in an instant when it's totally preventable, like, easily. And this is not the situation of like they had some kind of virus or something, and the Enterprise comes along and they have a cure for the virus and they like drop the cure. That would be different, because if there's a virus in the society, there will always be a certain number of people who are resistant to that virus who will survive. And there are people who will not survive. And then the survivors will go on and they will make more, they will have more children. They will come up with technological advancements to prevent the disease from spreading in the future. That is part of evolution, right? Like disease and stuff like that. That's part of evolution. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about letting the entire planet be wiped out. And that's totally preventable, but choosing not to prevent it. And I think that's a different thing. And maybe it's nuanced. And I could see them saying like Prime Directive is just like a blanket statement so that people don't have to deal with the nuance, because it's really hard to enforce any nuanced rules or laws. That's always really hard because now it's up to interpretation. However, I could make that argument because the whole point of the Prime Directive is that it's not a law, it's a series of guidelines that are all up for interpretation. The entire directive itself is up for interpretation. So I'm kind of like, what the F, Picard? So I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments or in the chat. Do you think Picard did the right thing by upholding the Prime Directive and letting the entire planet die? If you did, clearly I don't believe that. But if you believe that, let me know why you believe that, because there could easily be another side to this story that I am not seeing because I'm so focused on just like what to me seems like senseless death of an entire planet, minus one small village. Okay, that being said, I'm going to check the chat. But before I do, I want to let you know about next week's live stream where we're going to continue this conversation, but we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to be talking about the best temporal Prime Directive episodes. So all those are going to come from Star Trek Voyager because that show was nothing if not about temporal prime directive. Like they were always time traveling in that show. And I feel like there's a lot less wiggle room in the temporal prime directive. I feel like it's a lot more cut and dry with black and white of what you are and are not potentially affecting and some of the considerations to take in when thinking about the temporal prime directive. I feel like it's just more cut and dry. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'll totally be surprised next week when we have that conversation. But next week, we're going to continue that. Every week we meet right here, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern to talk all things Star Trek. But I want to check the chat to see if there are any thoughts about this episode. Nadia says, no, not Nikolai. They should have saved the Barallans and oh, that's so messed up. Saved the Barallans and left Nikolai on the surface of the dying planet. Just saying. But what about Nikolai's baby? He needs to be there for that baby because she shouldn't have to raise, another little Alexander all by herself. Yeah, that was just that whole episode was just it felt like un-Picard and un-Starfleet to just be like, the only consideration they gave this planet was a moment of silence. And you're like, you know what? If I was the Barallans, keep your moment of silence and save my atmosphere. That's what I would want. Save the planet, save my planet, and then nobody has to be silent for at all. Wingrace says, get your aspirin ready for next week. And Nadia says, 100%. Yeah, so temporal prime directive is going to be a good one. There's a lot of episodes on that, so I don't totally know the angle. I don't know. I'll probably do 10 because I feel like there's more than 10, but not that many more. Maybe there's like 12 or 14 time travel episodes. But that would be a fun discussion. We can talk about like, what would you have done in the scenario? Because I also have questions about like, well, if you're going to the future versus if you're going to the past, doesn't that change the temporal prime directive? Because if you're going to the future, you're not going to affect anything because you're from the past. You're not going to affect your past, but maybe you'll affect the future's future. I don't know. Anyways, all that's for next week. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, so that you will get notified next week when we have our next live conversation all about Star Trek. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your night or day or whatever time of day you happen to be watching this. And I will see you next time. Bye.